Hello, everyone. Dr. Frankie here. Super happy to be with you all this week, and I'm hoping that you get a lot out of my talk today, which is what does it mean to be a top in sex and dating? If you're interested in exploring queer sex or kink, it can be intimidating enough already, right? It's easy to feel as if you're starting all over again and everyone else knows these things that you don't. It can be even more confusing to see terms you don't even recognize floating around like top or bottom and so on. You may feel like you can never catch up or will always be seen as inexperienced if you don't feel an immediate connection to these terms. It doesn't have to be that way. You can get situated and learn some key context quickly and easily. And I'm going to share with you today what I think you need to know about what it means to be a top. So, what does it mean to be a top when it comes to vanilla sex? If we're talking about tops or bottoms in the context of normal or penetrative sex, first of all, we are generally talking about queer sex. Although, of course, there are many ways to have sex for people of all genders, and sex doesn't have to involve penetration. Sex between people of different genders doesn't necessarily involve a top and a bottom. For example, in queer sex, sex between people of the same gender or with the same set of genitalia, people often choose to take on different roles within the sex act. A top is someone who takes on the role of doing or performing sexual actions to the other person. And if the sex they're having involves penetration, the top is generally the one penetrating. Does that make sense? I hope so. If you're having lesbian sex between two people with vulvas, a top might wear a strap on, although they certainly don't have to. In very broad and oversimplified terms, a top is someone who does a sort of doing the sex act, and the bottom is someone who is done to. That's the simplest definition of a top in logistical terms. But in a more felt human sense, the top is somebody whose sexual interest and gratification is in doing rather than being done to. This is generally, well, it means generally that in addition to the physical satisfaction or pleasure that you get from sex, part of the appeal of sex for you is taking that more active role. It's important to remember, though, that while some people experience these terms as identity in that it forms a large part of their self-concept, many of us, it's more useful to just think of these terms as roles. That's to say, things that you do rather than things that you are. Just because you like having sex a certain way now or have had sex a certain way in the past doesn't mean that's what you always will like. It's totally possible that while you generally prefer to do rather than to be done to right now, you might want to try something different in the future. And that doesn't have to mean anything significant about your identity or personhood. Remember that tops can also be a verb. It's okay to just think through what you like or feel interested in right now, rather than getting hung up on who you are or what you are. So, what a top means in kink. Tops and bottoms have a related but unique meaning in kink context for both straight and queer people. While a top in gay sex is someone who takes on a general active role, kink involves a specific power dynamic, someone who willingly gives up some control and someone who willingly takes on a role of controlling the interaction. That second person is the top. This power dynamic can look a lot like a lot of things, depending on what kind of kink dynamic is at play, whether it's dominance and submission, sadism, discipline, role playing, things like that. The role remains consistent in that all of the actions in this dynamic are done by the top. If there's spanking, they're the one doing the spanking. If there's restraint, they're the ones tying someone up. But there's also a nuanced psychological component that's different than topping in vanilla sex. Being a kinky top is also a kind of persona that one chooses to take on as part of the power dynamic agreed upon during the kink scene. Depending on the top's preferences and that of their partner or partners, they could be authoritative, cold and aloof, sarcastic, or even kind and motherly, or a dozen other things. The point is that they're doing some level of reciprocal role play, taking on a position of power at the invitation of the other person. In addition to sex acts, they might direct the person to do something, make or enforce rules, or challenge or reassure their partner from their position of the role play, telling them they're being bad or naughty or good. Crucially, unless the people involved in the kink dynamic have agreed otherwise, which does sometimes happen, this role play is only for the duration of the scene, sexual encounter, so to speak. Being a top, even a kinky top, doesn't mean you're in charge of your partner 24/7 or that you have control over them in the relationship itself. Tops also sometimes call themselves dominants or a dom. This is related to being a top, and generally someone who describes themselves in this way also fits all the characteristics we would see in a top. However, someone involved in dominance, submission as a dominant way, or as a dominant may have more investment in and get more satisfaction from the psychological elements I described just before than the literal sex acts to them. Topping is mainly about embodying their roles as a figure with power in their dynamic and expressing that power in their dynamic with their partner. Giving instructions, making rules, or enforcing rules with consensual punishments might be more of a priority over literal sex acts. Are there different types of tops? There most definitely are. Although the term itself has a rich and nuanced history and connotation in queer and kink spaces, people might use newer, evolving terminology to articulate what kind of top they are. For instance, many people, correctly or not, associated topping with masculinity. Someone may identify as a femtop to make it clear that they present femininely and at the same time take on a dominant role in sex. A soft top might be someone who does take control during sex, but in a kind and loving way. It may treat their sex partner as someone to care for and nurture during sex scenes rather than someone who follows orders. These terms are constantly in flux and evolving with time, and you may find the terminology that either resonates for you or resonates with what you're looking for in a partner, or it may not feel important to you to drill down on specific labels. All are fine. It's okay. How do I know if I'm a top? Again, it's important to emphasize that you don't necessarily have to think of being a top or bottom as a fixed, immutable identity that you discover about yourself or can be right or wrong about. However, if you're wondering whether you'd like to explore topping or an identity as a top, I'm going to share some things to think about. When you fantasize about sex, what are you usually doing in these fantasies? Is it especially powerful in fantasies when you're doing to someone else? If you don't figure as the main character in your own fantasies, or you're imagining a more removed scenario, do you feel especially aroused by the person taking action or in control? When you think back to sexual experiences you've had in real life, are there any trends or through lines between the specific parts that are most thrilling to you? Remember that these are all questions that can remain open, and you can continue to think about them and experiment with it in your sex life indefinitely. I hope you found this helpful. I would love to hear your comments, questions, and I'm happy to respond. I really love hearing from folks, so definitely comment and subscribe. I will be here every week. I try to be pretty consistent. I'm thinking for now it'll be on Thursdays that I'll post my next video. And thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Take care, all.